a budget surplus of more than 65 billion euros over the next 3 years could be used to develop infrastructure in this country, write down national debt, create a new national reserve fund. This is what the Cabinet has been told, and Finance Minister Michael McGrath is bringing a paper to Cabinet outlining his plans for the future. But it got us thinking, Shane, 65 billion, it's an eye-watering sum, in our back pocket. What should we spend it on?
Yeah, see, you made some very good suggestions, and you're right, absolutely, about we shouldn't spend it on current spending. We should spend it on capital. We should invest in infrastructure, whether it's a Dublin Metro or whether it's more housing. And I absolutely agree with you. My concern is twofold. One, there'll be huge political pressure on Michael McGrath.
One for everyone in the audience,
yeah,
kind of thing.
Pascal Donoghue. I was making the point earlier. People still in Fine Gael still blame Pascal Donoghue for costing the last election because he did the right thing. Most politicians, despite what happened just over a decade ago, are not interested in the right thing. They're interested more in getting re-elected. The other big concern is, yes, we can invest and build more housing and all that kind of stuff, but there's huge capacity constraints in the economy, and if you start spending even more money, say for example on housing or on health or on a metro, and we don't have enough people to build that metro, or we don't have enough GPs,
we'll pay over the odds.
We'll pay hugely over the odds, and it'll just add to inflation.
Yeah, no, you're right on all of that, but I still think Ireland is awash with cash, and if we could spend it on something, I think we should buy something big, and by which I do mean invest in infrastructure.
Yeah.
I think an underground for Dublin. I think somebody else, a texter earlier on, said build massive amounts of wind infrastructure off the west coast. That's a brilliant idea. Spend it on something that is a one-off that we'll never have the money or be able to afford again, maybe, but that will last us several lifetimes.
Important to stress, we don't know if this money is going to be here in 4 or 5 years.
Well, exactly.
And I think what the Norwegians did was pretty sensible. I mean, first of all, they spent it and it caused huge inflation. Then they created a wealth investment fund, and it's now a huge fund. But anyway, look, do get involved. Let us know where and how should we be spending this money. You can WhatsApp us for free, 087 1400 106.
And I'm now joined by Professor John Fitzgerald. John, you heard what myself and Shane were saying. What do you think we should spend 65 billion euros on?
No, I think you had a very sensible discussion on this issue, so I'm not sure how much I can add to it. The problem is that we need a load more houses. If you could go to IKEA and buy them and stick them up tomorrow, put the kit together, then go out and do it. But the problem is, as you mentioned, the capacity. We actually have to build the houses. We can't go out and just buy the houses. And there aren't the people there in the economy. We're fully employed. So we probably need to move more people into building construction from IT or distribution or whatever. But that takes time. So if you try to spend it, as you said, if you spent it all now, you just get inflation. You wouldn't get anything more. And the experience going back to the Netherlands when they found natural gas in the 1970s, 50 years ago, there was what was called the Dutch disease, because they went out and spent it. And in spending it, a lot of traditional businesses closed down because they couldn't compete because wages were high in natural gas and so on.
So knock-on effects that were unforeseen perhaps came from that.
Yeah. So I think the government's saying, let's save the excess. If we can spend the money effectively on housing, then spend it. But they're not going to be able to spend that sum of money on housing, so save it.
No, and in fact, even if we did, we might skew the housing market in the opposite direction to where we're at the moment. But John, what about the idea of spending it on large infrastructural projects, like maybe a massive wind farm off the Atlantic coast, or something like an underground for Dublin? Because in my mind, I don't see it as a good idea to lash it into current expenditure where it's frittered away, and then we're signed up ever more to paying over the odds forever for running our society. But what about the idea of purchasing something big for the country and for society as a whole that might last us, a couple of 100 years?
60 years ago, when I was recovering from chickenpox, my father gave me a map of the London Metro underground and said, design an underground for Dublin. And ever since I was 10, I've been looking forward to an underground for Dublin. So I'd love it, but I don't think I'll live to see it. The problem with something like that is that the planning delays and so on, we're having difficulty delivering the metro that's there. trying to do more, it'll be 2040 at the current rate of going. So I think we really need to look at the planning delays and bureaucracy that's holding up housing, holding up wind farms, holding up forestry.
What about sort of the idea of a rainy day fund or a pension fund? We have an ageing population. We're not well set for sort of dealing with that going forward, and many people haven't made adequate provision for their own old age. Is that something that you would feel, even though it is probably going to be going at some point into current expenditure, is that something that would be a good idea?
I think that's a really good idea. I'll be dead before the crisis hits, but you will need somebody younger than you to pay your pension, and there aren't going to be that many of them. So it is your pension fund we're talking about, and I think that we have to be realistic, and pensions for your generation and younger will face major problems. So if we save now to provide the pension for you in the future, that's a good thing.
Okay. The idea of writing down national debt, is that still important? I mean, there was the talk around the time of the Troika arriving and all that we were indebted up to our eyeballs, more or less, and that this was something that we were going to be saddling our grandchildren with. It was all of that. But now people would argue that perhaps we're no more, and even slightly less saddled with a huge national debt than some countries. What's your sort of view on what we should do about paying that down?
Nobody's interested in paying down the debt, but that is what will happen. If we invest in a pension fund or whatever, the net debt is going to fall. But the reason for this investment is not because we want to cut the debt, which the interest bill currently is very low, but because we can't spend the money effectively. So I think the national debt is really not part of the discussion.
Okay, so it's not an issue. And if we were to do something like build, I'm still fascinated by that story of your father, who was probably then the Taoiseach, making you design an underground for Dublin. But if we were doing something like that, is that something that we should do using some of this pot of cash and then leveraging it with further debt, like the way you would with a mortgage on a house?
Yeah, I think investing for the future in infrastructure, public transport and renewable energy, that's a really good investment. So if we can spend the money that way, great. But just at the moment, we're finding it difficult even to produce 30,000 houses.
Okay. So in your view, the sensible thing then is infrastructure, rainy day fund, and hold back, because Shane made the very valid point earlier on that there will be huge political pressure while the coffers are full to have a bumper giveaway and to buy votes, is how some people would see it. Is that a terrible mistake?
That would be a terrible mistake. I think the temptation is really going to be there in the 2020 election, the 1997 election. Governments had actually run the economy well and didn't splurge. However, I leave it to political scientists, but my suspicion is but trying to buy votes could well end up being bad value for money, even for politically. I'm not sure that you could fool the people of Ireland by telling them things are going to be great tomorrow. And
are you sure? Because we see a huge move towards populism in Irish politics. Is that not fair to say?
There is some move. I wouldn't exaggerate it. Yes, we will probably spend too much coming up to the general election and spend some of it wastefully. I'm hopeful, though, that sanity will prevail.
Okay. Look, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning. We do appreciate it. That is John Fitzgerald, our adjunct professor in economics in Trinity College in Dublin.